welcome to the channel. Lately I've been reading some books that talk about big scale battles in very different ways, and so I kind of wanted to talk about the thoughts I've been having along those lines and how I've noticed differences between different age categories and different types of ways authors like to describe their battles. So here we go. So I'm going to be going pretty in-depth in talking about stuff that goes on in these books, and most of the big battles are very much towards the end. So if you haven't read these books yet and you would like to know what happens totally on your own first, you might want to put off watching this video until you've read them. I won't give unnecessary spoilers, but if you like everything to be brand new, then probably put it off. So, the ones that I'm mainly going to be comparing today are Court of Wings and Ruin and The Battle for Scandia. This one is middle grade, this one is YA. And I noticed some big differences because I read them pretty much right after each other, so it was very easy to compare. I didn't even notice the mountains in the background on this cover. Cool. So, this one is set in a world full of magic. It's a majorly fantasy type book. It's all the main characters have a lot of big superpower type stuff, a lot of power. A fair amount of it is elemental, like fire, water, wind, ice, that kind of thing, but there's also other powers like mind reading and just killing people with your thoughts type stuff. So one element of all of these battles is magic, and how tactics are different because this is a world where magic is a thing. For one thing, the author has done a good job where she has built things so that there are limits on the powers that the characters have, because the main characters all have very, very powerful superpowers, and they're a lot more powerful than all the people around them. But they can be exhausted. They can run out of magical energy, and then it needs to build up again, which is very much how my own magic system works. So I like that, and I like seeing it in other places so that I can kind of figure out how people use it and stuff. And also, since magic is such a common thing in this world, there are natural defenses against it, much like technology is a natural thing in our world. So we have firewalls and such on our computers, so that while people have the power to hack, people also have the power to protect from hacking. And so it's kind of like that. There are attacking magics and there are also defending magics, and various cities and palaces and places have defensive magic built into them so that people can't just walk in and smash things. And various people also have walls around their minds so that people can't just walk in and smash their brain. So on a certain level, it's a little difficult to compare these because this has a lot of magical battles going on, whereas this one very much is not magical battles. It's medieval type battles with swords and bows and stuff, but no magic. But there is also something that could apply to both magic and non-magic battles that I still noticed a difference in them, which is basically whether the battles are described to make you actually see what's going on and be able to wrap your head around how this battle would go in the real world, slash basically tactics, and whether tactics are talked about and whether you can see tactics happening. One thing that I've noticed, not just in A Court of Mist and Fury, but in a lot of YA battles, is that tactics are not really hugely used. There's tactics to an extent, like I said, about defending versus attacking. This one also talks about some war tactics where the different leaders of the army are taking into account how tired the other army and their own army will be after marching, and taking magic into account where they each know that this army has the ability to winnow, which is basically transporting from one area to another, or they have the power to be invisible. And there's a little bit of how they take that into account and make account for that. And there's also a little bit about how flying legions take on ground legions and how there's stuff like that. But all of that is very much kept to a minimum. Most of the description of the battles is very generally how it's going, and also whether the front lines are holding and whether it's breaking in certain areas, and saying whether this person who is leading this section is making progress or if they're falling back and failing. And it's very much an individual thing, not whether people are leading well, but whether they are doing well themselves, partially because each of these main characters who is leading the section is very much more powerful than all the people around them that they're leading. So things depend more upon an individual succeeding than on formation or a tactical strategy of a group working, which I don't mind that much. But even within the individuals, there aren't a lot of tactics discussed. There's basically whether a person decides to rush at a certain time, or whether they are cooperating with this or that person. There's not a lot of they did this because of this. There's cases where it'll tell you they conserve their magic for this or that purpose, but not like how they plan to exactly use their magic to counteract this other magic. I really like getting into magic theory and stuff, and these books don't go as deep as they could. They go in deep to a lot of different things. I really like these books. It's just that my personal preference for that particular area of stuff is I like to go deeper in that area. But there are a lot of people who don't give a care about that, so I totally understand not going into that. There are various things that I don't care about, so as an author I don't put them in, even though other people care about them. And that doesn't at all make me not like this book. I like this book for various other reasons. A book doesn't have to be perfect in every area of my taste. And also, something I've noticed is the sentences feel tighter in this than in this one, this middle grade. It feels like a lot of times sentences are tighter in YA than in middle grade, and a little less awkward, I guess, a little more epic, even though a little more, I guess, like they're hitting a certain humor point, or they're hitting a certain amount of drama. I know what it is. It just hit me. It's that in the YA, they tend to hint at things that in middle grade they tend to state outright or state twice. I've noticed a lot of times that in this one, things that were mentioned twice or through two different people's point of view. I think that's a lot of what it is, that it's meant for younger readers, and so things are more stated so that people can understand easier in case they miss something, whereas this one feels tighter because they only mention things, they mention even important things sometimes just in passing, and you have to remember and comb through, and sometimes you might even not get things the first time around. So that's one way in which, although the battle scenes aren't exactly my favorite type, I do very much like the only hinting at things, not stating things outright or not saying things twice that I find in middle grade. But in these middle grade ones, I really like the way they do battles. Not just in this series, but in other series, I've noticed middle grade tends to go more for tactics and making sure that the way they write it is the way wars really worked. Like in this one, there's basically a war between Vikings and Hun-like people who ride horses and are from mid-Asia sort of area that are mainly bows from horses type fighters. And it's a much bigger horse fighter army versus the Viking type army. They're not actually called that. They're set in another world, but they're clearly based on those two groups. And there's clearly been a lot of work done to figure out what would happen if those two groups clashed, and what would happen if those two groups clashed and the Vikings had a really good tactician who was an Englishman who had longbows, and they happened to have captured a whole bunch of longbows and had them available to use against these horse people, what would happen? And it's a very cool exploration of horseback tactics of hit and run, and archer tactics on the horses of hit and run, and how longbows would totally screw that up, and how longbows can interact with having the front line being these Viking warriors. And we actually get the perspective both of various leaders at different places in the Viking side, which is the side of the protagonist, and we also get the perspective of the antagonist army leaders and why they're doing what they're doing, and how being at different areas you have to be able to see the battle, and people have to bring back news from the front in order for the generals to make decisions, and just all sorts of stuff like that, and I love it. Other middle grade books that have this sort of approach to battle tactics and how they write battles and individual fight scenes are the Warrior series that I've talked about before. Also, sometimes the Little Torah series, sometimes that takes more of the less specific view of battles, but sometimes they also go very much in depth. Then there are a couple of other books that approach battles in very much a way that I enjoy, that are adult books, not YA or middle grade, and those are the Deed of Paxenarian, and also the, what's his name? He's a dark elf. Drizzt. The Legend of Drizzt series. No, I've never ever read better written fight scenes, individual type fight scenes. The main character Drizzt is a sword wielder. He has 2 curved swords, and the way they're described so specifically and with such, I don't know, you can see the people moving and you can tell they're moving fast, but you can still, all the individual movements are still described, and they're clearly done very realistically. Clearly the guy has done a lot of good research, and oh my gosh, I love it. I love it so much. He's the one that I highly recommend for individual fight scenes. There aren't a lot of full-scale war-sized battles in those ones, although I believe there are a few. But for full-size battle tactics that are based on historical stuff, the Deed of Paxenarian is one of the best. The main character, Pax, short for Paxenarian of all things, is part of a mercenary group, and these mercenaries march in a line and use short swords and bucklers. And there's a lot talked about of how different mercenary groups interacted with each other when they had to go against each other for some reason. Also, there's a lot of talking about siege. In this case, the sieges that happen are mostly starve-out type sieges. And there's also a lot of descriptions of battles where it's just 2 lines marching at each other and then stabbing, and how that works. But there are also individual duels, and they're all very specific about movements, and there's a little bit of magic in this world, but the main character mostly uses just her sword, and so there's a lot of stuff about how that works, and I love it. The main author who I would think of as doing YA, who does fight scenes / war scenes well, would be Tamora Pierce. She writes about a country called Tortal, and she writes about lady knights mostly, but also others with magic and stuff. And when she writes individual fight scenes, she always describes how each time the sword was moved in this or that formation, how people used taunts and jeerings to get the other person to be off their guard, how you had to work out under certain conditions to get the muscles to do this or that wielding of weapons. Her magic fight scenes, because it is a magical world and several of the main characters use magic, are they're good. I enjoy them a lot, but they're also not exactly what I like. I really like really digging into the magic stuff. And the only books that I can say does that I've read as far as magic is concerned, instead of just swords and such, is Uprooted, which I've raved about quite a lot, and I believe I've also talked a lot about how a big portion of the book is studying in-depth magic and how different magic interacts and how magic fights and how you can improvise, and also magic that is very solid and done in a certain pattern, and how you can fight magic with magic, and very specifically not just by overpowering or something like that, but by certain tactics. And so I love that book for so many reasons. So if any of you have read these books and have thoughts on them, especially on the battle sequences, and if you have a favorite type of battle sequences, I would love to know about it, or someone who writes them really good. I'm always looking for another person who can write good fight scenes. I personally, at the moment, don't think I'm very good at writing fight scenes, but I hope to one day be through practice and through reading other people's work that is good. Also, what are your opinions on YA versus middle grade versus adult, on how they phrase things, how they make things more obvious or not, or how they treat battles? I'd love to know. For now, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!